I never expected that a broken shower would change my life, but that's exactly what happened. It's funny how the biggest shifts can be triggered by the most mundane disasters. For me, it started with a frantic knock on my apartment door just after midnight, a sound that sliced through the quiet hum of my solitary existence and set in motion something I had long since given up on hoping for. My life, up until that point, was a study in comfortable routine. I'm Lucas, and at 28, I worked as a freelance copy editor from the quiet sanctuary of my one-bedroom apartment. My days were measured in manuscripts and keystrokes, my evenings in the soft glow of a reading lamp and the company of fictional characters. It was a peaceful life, but a profoundly lonely one, walled in by a caution I had built brick by brick over the years. My world was safe, predictable, and entirely my own. The building I lived in was old, with thick walls that usually muffled the lives of my neighbors into a vague, ignorable hum. Usually, there was one life, however, that I couldn't ignore, one that seemed to broadcast in a frequency tuned specifically to my awareness. That life belonged to Caleb. He lived in 4B, directly across the hall. He was the kind of man you notice without trying. Tall, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his t-shirts, and a casual confidence that seemed as natural to him as breathing. I saw him mostly in passing. Coming home from the gym, his dark hair damp with sweat, a gym bag slung over his shoulder. Or carrying in groceries, the paper bags looking comically small in his arms. Sometimes I'd see him tinkering with his motorcycle in the parking lot on a Saturday afternoon, his brow furrowed in concentration, a smear of grease on his cheek. He always offered a friendly, uncomplicated nod. "Hey man," he'd say, and the sound of his voice, a low and easy rumble, would echo in the hallway long after he'd closed his door. From my carefully constructed distance, I had pieced together a narrative for him. He was thoroughly, unequivocally straight. He worked in construction or some other physical trade, I assumed. He probably spent his weekends watching sports with his buddies and dating women who were as effortlessly beautiful as he was handsome. He was a resident of a world I only observed, a world of easy social graces and unspoken certainties that felt entirely foreign to my own. He was, in short, the perfect object for a quiet, hopeless crush. A safe one, because there was absolutely no chance it would ever be anything more. That's what I told myself, anyway. It was easier than admitting the depth of the longing he stirred in me with a simple hallway greeting. My apartment was my shell, the place where I could be entirely myself without fear of judgment. It was neat, ordered, and filled with books. The air always smelled faintly of old paper and the coffee I perpetually brewed. It was a space that reflected my inner world, controlled, quiet, and a little bit lonely. I was content in my carefully curated solitude, or so I believed. I had convinced myself that this quiet ache was just a fundamental part of who I was, a low-grade hum of loneliness that was better than the sharp, unpredictable pain of rejection. And then came the knock. It wasn't a polite tap. It was urgent, a series of hard raps that vibrated through the wood of my front door. I froze, my heart kicking against my ribs. No one ever knocked on my door this late. My mind raced through a list of terrible possibilities. But when I peered through the peephole, the fisheye lens showed me a distorted, frantic version of Caleb. His hair was wet, but not from the gym. It was plastered to his forehead, and water was dripping from the ends onto his plain gray t-shirt, which was already dark with damp patches. His face, usually so calm and composed, was a mask of sheer panic. For a moment, I just stared, my brain struggling to reconcile this image with the one I held in my mind. Then I fumbled with the locks, my hands suddenly clumsy. "Caleb, is everything okay?" I asked as I pulled the door open. He looked past me, into my apartment, his eyes wide and desperate. "Man, I am so sorry to bother you this late. I know it's crazy," he started, his words tumbling out in a rush. "But I have a massive problem. A pipe, I think, it burst in my wall. Water is everywhere. The maintenance guy won't be here for at least an hour, and I can't get the main shutoff to work." He gestured vaguely back towards his own apartment, and even from my doorway, I could hear a faint hissing sound, the ominous noise of water going where it shouldn't. He ran a hand through his soaking hair, looking utterly defeated. It was the first time I had ever seen him look anything less than completely in control, and it was disarmingly human. "Oh my God," I said, my own concern overriding my usual social anxiety. "Is there anything I can do? Do you need towels? Buckets?" He shook his head, a wry, frustrated smile briefly touching his lips. "I've sacrificed every towel I own to the flood gods." No, the real issue, and this is going to sound insane, but I was in the middle of a shower when it happened. I'm covered in soap. He looked down at himself as if just realizing it. I really need to rinse off. My landlord said the water to the whole building might have to be shut off soon. Could I possibly use your shower? I know it's a huge ask. The request hung in the air between us, charged with a strange and sudden intimacy. My mind, which usually spun with 1,000 anxious what-ifs, went completely blank. Here was Caleb, the man from my daydreams, soaked and soapy and standing on my welcome mat, asking to come into my home, into my most private space. It was a scenario so far outside the realm of my imagined possibilities that I couldn't even process it properly. Of course, there was only one possible answer. Yes, I heard myself say, the word feeling small and inadequate. Of course, come in. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding, the relief on his face palpable. Thank you. Seriously, you are a lifesaver. I stepped back, holding the door open wider, and Caleb crossed the threshold from the hallway into my world. He was careful not to drip on the small rug by the door, a small, considerate gesture that I noticed even in my daze. I pointed down the short hallway of my own apartment. Bathroom's just there, on the left. Help yourself. There are clean towels in the cabinet above the toilet. Thanks, Lucas, he said, and the sound of my name in his mouth, something I'd only heard in brief passing hellos, felt strangely significant. He gave me one last grateful look before disappearing into the bathroom, closing the door softly behind him. I was left standing in my living room, the silence suddenly deafening, punctuated only by the distant, muffled sound of my shower starting up. My heart was still hammering, and I had the distinct feeling that the carefully constructed walls of my quiet life had just been breached. The sound of the water running in my bathroom was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. I stood motionless in my living room, listening to the rhythmic spray against the tiles. Caleb was in there, in my shower, using my soap. It was an invasion of my personal space that should have felt alarming, but instead, it felt charged, electric. The mundane reality of my apartment, the stacks of books on the coffee table, the half-finished mug of tea growing cold on its coaster, the worn patch on my favorite armchair, was suddenly overlaid with this extraordinary circumstance. I tried to act normal, whatever that meant. I busied myself by tidying things that were already tidy, moving a stack of magazines from one end of the table to the other. I checked my email on my phone, reading the same sentence 3 times without absorbing a single word. Every part of my brain was focused on that closed bathroom door. I could smell the faint, clean scent of my own shower gel beginning to drift into the hallway, and the thought of it on his skin sent a strange, warm jolt through me. This was so much more than a neighbor needing a favor. This was a crack in the observational lens through which I viewed him. He wasn't just the handsome guy across the hall anymore. He was a real person, flustered and damp, and standing in my bathroom. The distance I had so carefully maintained was collapsing with every second that he spent inside my home. My carefully managed, secret crush was threatening to become something messier, something more real. After what felt like both an eternity and no time at all, the water shut off. The silence that followed was even more intense. I heard the click of the cabinet door, the rustle of a towel. I held my breath, unsure of what to do or say next. Should I offer him a drink? Should I just let him leave? My mind was a frantic mess of social protocol I was utterly unequipped for. The bathroom door opened, and he emerged, a cloud of steam billowing out behind him. He was wearing the same damp jeans, but he was shirtless, scrubbing his wet hair with one of my light blue towels. My eye snagged for a fraction of a second on the sharp lines of his collarbones, the defined muscles of his chest and abdomen, glistening with tiny droplets of water. It was a sight so casually intimate that I felt my face flush, and I quickly looked away, focusing on a particularly interesting spot on my ceiling. "Man, I feel human again," he said, his voice full of relief. He lowered the towel, his hair now a tousled, damp mess. "I can't thank you enough. You really saved me." "It's no problem," I managed, my voice sounding a little strained. Is your apartment okay? He sighed, leaning against the doorframe. It's a disaster. The maintenance guy showed up while I was in the shower. Apparently, a whole section of pipe is corroded. He shut off the water to my unit, but he said it's a big job. It's going to be a couple of days, at least, before it's fixed. He looked genuinely stressed, the earlier panic replaced by a weary resignation. An awkward silence fell between us. My brain was screaming at me to just say, "You're welcome," and let him go, to retreat back into my safe, predictable solitude. But another part of me, a braver, more curious part, didn't want this strange, unexpected connection to end. "Do you want a drink?" I blurted out. "I have whiskey, or tea, or water, whatever." I cringed inwardly at my rambling offer. Caleb's expression softened. He seemed to study my face for a moment, and I felt exposed under his gaze. Then, a slow, genuine smile spread across his lips. It was different from his usual hallway smile. This one was warmer, more personal. "Whiskey sounds amazing right now," he said. "If you're sure it's not too late." "It's fine," I said, a wave of relief washing over me. "Have a seat." I turned to the kitchen, my hands trembling slightly as I poured 2 glasses of whiskey. When I turned back, he had settled onto my sofa, looking surprisingly at home amidst my stacks of books. He'd put his damp t-shirt back on, a small courtesy that I found inexplicably touching. As I handed him the glass, our fingers brushed for a fleeting moment. It was nothing, a completely accidental contact, but it felt like a spark, a tiny jolt of electricity that shot up my arm. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned. He didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he didn't show it. He took a sip of the whiskey and let out a long, appreciative sigh. "This is good. Thank you, Lucas." We sat there for a while, talking. It started with the plumbing disaster, but it quickly drifted to other things. I learned he wasn't in construction. He was a custom furniture designer. He worked with reclaimed wood, building beautiful, solid pieces by hand. The grease I'd seen on him wasn't from a car engine. It was from waxing a finished dining table. A hidden artistic side. It was so unexpected, so contrary to the simple, one-dimensional image I had created for him. He asked me what I did, and when I told him I was an editor, his eyes lit up with genuine interest. He pointed to a thick, worn-looking novel on my coffee table. "Is that any good? I've been meaning to read it." We ended up talking about books for half an hour. He was thoughtful, well-read, and had opinions that were both surprising and intelligent. The confident, jock-like persona I had projected onto him dissolved completely, replaced by someone far more complex, more interesting, and infinitely more dangerous to my carefully guarded heart. He wasn't just handsome. He was kind and smart, and he had this way of listening, of really listening, that made me feel seen. At some point, he glanced at the clock on my cable box, and his eyes widened. "Wow, it's almost 2 in the morning. I should let you get some sleep. I've taken up your whole night." He stood up, placing the empty whiskey glass carefully on a coaster. "But seriously, thank you. For everything." As he walked to the door, he paused, turning back to me. There was a hesitation in his posture, a flicker of something uncertain in his eyes. "Hey, he started, rubbing the back of his neck. It was the first time he'd seemed nervous. "Since my water is going to be out for a few days, would it be completely out of line to ask if I could use your shower again tomorrow? I can go to the gym. But, well, your water pressure is way better." He finished with a small, self-deprecating laugh, but his eyes were serious, searching mine for an answer. My heart did a slow, painful flip in my chest. This wasn't just a one-time emergency anymore. This was an invitation for more. More time, more proximity, more of this terrifying, exhilarating feeling. Hope, a feeling I had suppressed for so long, began to unfurl in my chest, fragile and bright. "Yeah," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "That's fine. Of course." His face broke into that warm, genuine smile again. "Awesome. Thanks, man. I owe you big time." He opened the door and stepped back into the hallway. "Good night, Lucas." "Good night, Caleb," I replied, watching him go. I closed the door and leaned my forehead against the cool wood, my mind reeling. The air in my apartment was different now. It was filled with the lingering scent of his presence and the impossible, dangerous glimmer of hope. My quiet, orderly world had been turned upside down, and I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that I never wanted to turn it back. The next day passed in a blur of anxious anticipation. I tried to work, but the words on the screen swam together, my focus completely shot. Every creak in the hallway, every footstep outside my door, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I was a mess of competing emotions. Part of me was giddy with a hopeful excitement I hadn't felt since I was a teenager. The other part was consumed by a familiar, crushing anxiety. What if I had imagined everything? What if he was just being friendly, and I was reading way too much into a simple neighborly exchange? This was my pattern, wasn't it? To build elaborate fantasies out of the smallest crumbs of kindness, only to have them crumble into dust. I kept replaying our conversation, dissecting every word, every glance, searching for definitive proof that what I felt wasn't entirely one-sided. His smile when he talked about his woodwork, the way his eyes had held mine when he asked about the book, the hesitation before he asked to use my shower again. Were these clues? Or just the meaningless artifacts of a friendly, stressed-out guy being nice to his neighbor? Fear and hope waged a silent war inside me. Around 7 in the evening, there was a knock on the door. It was a much softer knock this time, tentative. My heart leaped into my throat. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my t-shirt, and opened the door. Caleb stood there, a gym bag in one hand and a six-pack of craft beer in the other. He looked less frantic than the night before, but there was still a hint of weariness around his eyes. "Hey," he said, offering a small, almost shy smile. "Shower appointment." "Hey," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Come on in. And you didn't have to bring beer." "It's the least I can do," he said, stepping inside and placing the beer on my kitchen counter. "Peace offering for turning your bathroom into a public utility." His attempt at a joke was light, but his eyes were searching mine, as if gauging my reaction. It felt like we were navigating a new, unspoken territory, both of us a little unsure of the rules. While he showered, I sat on the sofa again, the beer he brought sitting untouched on the counter. The novelty of the situation hadn't worn off, but it was now laced with a thick layer of tension. This time felt different. It wasn't an emergency. It was an arrangement, an agreement that brought him back into my space, into my life, for another evening. When he came out of the bathroom, he was wearing shorts and a fresh t-shirt, his hair damp. He had the towel I'd left out for him slung around his neck. "All clean," he announced, though his voice was quieter than usual. "Good," I said, my own voice equally subdued. He walked over to the sofa, but didn't sit down immediately. He stood there for a moment, rubbing the back of his neck with his free hand. I noticed he did that when he was nervous. My back is killing me," he said, wincing slightly as he rotated his shoulder. "I think I pulled something trying to wrench that shut-off valve yesterday, and then I probably made it worse at the gym today." The statement hung in the air, a plain declaration of discomfort. My first instinct, the polite and distant neighbor instinct, was to say something sympathetic but non-committal, like, "Oh, that's too bad." But the braver part of me, the part that was tired of living behind walls, saw an opening, an opportunity to offer more than just words. "I have some muscle rub," I said, the words coming out before I could second-guess them. "You know, the strong-smelling stuff. It might help." He looked surprised, then grateful. "Really? That would be incredible." "Yeah, let me get it." I went to my bathroom, my hands shaking as I rummaged through the medicine cabinet. This was it. This was a line, a boundary between neighbor and something else. I could feel it, humming in the air. I came back with a small jar, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He had sat down on the edge of the sofa, his back to me. "The problem is, it's this one spot," he said, twisting and trying to reach between his shoulder blades. "I can't quite get to it." My breath hitched. The air in the room suddenly felt thick, heavy. This was the moment, the turning point. I could retreat, make an excuse, and the night would end with a shared beer and a polite goodbye. Or I could step forward, cross that invisible line, and see what happened on the other side. I chose to step forward. "Here," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Let me." I knelt on the sofa behind him, the cushions dipping under my weight. He went very still, his posture rigid. I unscrewed the lid of the jar, and the sharp, medicinal scent of wintergreen and menthol filled the space between us. I scooped a small amount onto my fingers. The cream was cool against my skin. "Where does it hurt?" I asked softly. "Right there," he murmured, his voice strained, as he guided my hand to a spot just to the right of his spine. The moment my fingers made contact with his skin, a shiver went through him. His skin was warm, smooth, and firm beneath my touch. I began to rub the cream in, my movements tentative at first, then more confident as I worked it into the tight muscle. I could feel the knot of tension under his skin, and I focused on it, pressing firmly with my thumb. Neither of us spoke. The only sounds in the room were the soft slide of my hand against his back and our quiet, synchronized breathing. The air was electric. This was no longer just about a sore muscle. This was an act of profound intimacy, a silent conversation being held through touch. My entire world had shrunk to this single point of contact, to the feel of his skin under my hand, the heat radiating from his body. He let out a shaky breath and his head dropped forward, his shoulders slumping in surrender. That's the spot, he said, his voice thick with something I couldn't quite decipher. I continued the slow, circular motion, my fingers learning the landscape of his back. Time seemed to warp, stretching and slowing down. I was acutely aware of everything. The way the light from the lamp cast a soft glow on his neck, the faint, clean scent of my shower gel on his skin, mingling with the sharp aroma of the muscle rub. My own pulse was a roaring in my ears. I was terrified and exhilarated all at once. After a few minutes that felt like a lifetime, I slowly pulled my hand away. The connection was broken, but the energy of it still crackled in the air between us. Better? I asked, my voice hoarse. He didn't answer right away. He just sat there, his back still to me. Then, very slowly, he turned his head to look at me over his shoulder. His eyes were dark, his expression unreadable. He looked at me for a long, silent moment, a moment so charged with unspoken questions that I felt like I couldn't breathe. It felt as if he was seeing me for the first time, really seeing me. And what he saw, there was a reflection of the same question that was screaming in my own mind. What is this? What is happening between us? Then, without a word, he turned back around. The moment was over. But nothing was the same. A line had been crossed, a boundary dissolved. We had stepped into a new, undefined space, and neither of us knew the way out. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. It was completely different from the comfortable quiet we had shared the night before. This was a silence born of tension, of a question asked and left unanswered. I retreated to the other end of the sofa, putting a deliberate, safe distance between us. I grabbed one of the beers he'd brought and twisted the cap off, the small hiss of carbonation sounding explosive in the quiet room. I offered it to him, and he took it without meeting my eyes. He took a long swallow of the beer, his gaze fixed on the floor. I watched him, my mind racing, replaying the last 10 minutes on an endless loop. The warmth of his skin under my fingers was a phantom sensation, a memory so vivid it felt like it was still happening. I had initiated it. I had offered to help. I had touched him. Had I gone too far? Had I misinterpreted kindness as something more and made him deeply uncomfortable? The hope that had bloomed so brightly in my chest was now being choked by a thick, thorny vine of anxiety. Thanks, he said finally, his voice low and gravelly. My back feels a lot better. Good, I replied, the single word feeling hollow. We sat there, drinking our beers in near total silence. The easy conversation from the night before was gone, replaced by a palpable awkwardness. I tried to think of something to say, something normal and casual that could reset the atmosphere, but my mind was a blank slate. Every possible topic felt loaded. Every innocuous question seemed to carry a hidden weight. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and the slightest misstep would send me plummeting. Caleb finished his beer and a few more long drinks, then stood up abruptly. Well, he said, still not looking at me directly. I should probably go. Let you have your apartment back. Okay, I said, my heart sinking. This was it. I had messed it up. I had scared him off. The brief, beautiful connection was broken, and it was my fault. I followed him to the door, a familiar feeling of resignation settling over me. This is why I kept to myself. This is why I didn't take risks. The hope was always more painful than the loneliness. At the door, he finally turned to face me. His expression was conflicted, a jumble of emotions I couldn't begin to untangle. There was confusion, maybe regret, and something else, something deeper that I couldn't name. So, same time tomorrow, he asked, the question sounding hesitant, almost forced. I was so sure he was going to make an excuse, to say he'd just use the gym from now on. The question caught me completely off guard. Oh, yeah, if you still want to. A flicker of something, was it relief, passed across his face. Yeah, I do, he said quickly. Okay. Well, good night, Lucas. Good night, I echoed to the closed door. I spent the rest of the night and all of the next day in a state of exquisite torment. My apartment, once my sanctuary, now felt like a stage where a confusing drama was playing out. Every object seemed to hold a memory of him. The sofa where he sat, the bathroom he used, the empty beer bottle still on the counter. I was trapped in the aftermath, analyzing every single micro-expression, every shift in his tone. My internal monologue was a relentless cycle of hope and despair. One moment, I would fixate on the way he had shivered when I touched him, the way his voice had gone thick. Surely, that meant something. It had to. He felt it too. He was just as confused and overwhelmed as I was. Hope would surge, warm and intoxicating. I would imagine him thinking about me, replaying the moment just as I was. But then, doubt would creep in, insidious and cold. I would remember his silence, his refusal to meet my eyes, the abrupt way he had left. I had clearly made a massive miscalculation. He was a kind, straight guy who had accepted a well-intentioned offer, and I had turned it into something charged and weird. He was probably dreading coming back, only agreeing to it because he was too polite to say no after I'd done him a favor. The shame of it would wash over me, hot and suffocating. This internal battle was exhausting. I was living more in my head than in the real world, a spectator to my own spiraling thoughts. The anticipation for that evening was a knot of dread and desperate longing in my stomach. I didn't know if I wanted him to knock on my door or if I wanted him to just disappear and release me from this state of suspended animation. Either way, I knew that when he arrived, something would have to give. The tension between us was unsustainable. It would either snap and break us apart, or it would pull us together. I had no idea which it would be. The third knock came later than usual, around 9. I had spent the last hour pacing my living room, my nerves stretched to their breaking point. When I opened the door, Caleb wasn't holding a gym bag or a six-pack. He was holding a bottle of wine, a nice one, I noticed, and a small, brown paper bag that smelled incredible. Hey, he said. His voice was quiet, and he looked nervous, more nervous than I'd ever seen him. He held up the offerings. My water is officially fixed. The landlord gave me the all-clear about an hour ago. My stomach dropped. It was over. The excuse for our proximity was gone. This was him coming to say a final thank you before retreating back to his side of the hallway for good. A crushing sense of finality washed over me. Oh, I said, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. That's great. Yeah, he said, not sounding like it was great at all. He shifted his weight, looking down at the wine bottle in his hands. So I know I don't need your shower anymore, but I was wondering if I could still come in. I brought dinner. As a proper thank you for everything. He finally lifted his eyes to meet mine, and they were filled with a raw, pleading vulnerability that took my breath away. Please. The polite, self-protective thing to do would be to accept his gift with thanks and send him on his way. But looking at his face, at the undisguised hope and fear warring in his expression, I knew I couldn't. I was tired of being safe. I stepped back and opened the door wider. Please, I said, echoing his own word. Come in. He walked into the kitchen and set the food and wine on the counter. The tension from the night before was back, but it was different now. It wasn't awkward. It was potent, a tangible presence in the room. We were both acutely aware that this evening had a purpose. This was a conversation that had to be had. We ate the takeout he'd brought, some amazing Thai food from a place I'd never tried, mostly in silence. But it was a working silence, a prelude. We were gathering our thoughts, steeling our nerves. After we finished, he poured 2 glasses of wine, his movements slow and deliberate. He handed one to me and then leaned back against the kitchen counter, his glass clutched in both hands. He stared into the red liquid for a long moment. So, he began, his voice low and steady. I need to be honest with you about something, Lucas. My heart hammered against my ribs. Here it comes, I thought. The gentle letdown. The, you're a great guy, but speech. I braced myself for the impact. My shower, he said, still looking down. It wasn't really broken. I blinked, confused. What? But the water, the maintenance guy. He finally looked up at me, his gaze direct and unflinching. Oh, There was a leak, yeah? A tiny drip behind the wall. It was nothing. I could have waited a week to get it fixed. It definitely didn't burst. He took a shaky breath. I panicked and poured a bucket of water on the floor. And on myself. I just stared at him, my mind trying to process this revelation. He had faked the emergency. The whole thing. The midnight knock, the desperation, it was all a lie. I felt a confusing mix of anger, hurt, and a wild, illogical surge of hope. Why? I whispered. Because I'm a coward, he said, a bitter, self-deprecating smile touching his lips. Because I've seen you in the hallway for 6 months, and you have this quiet, gentle way about you that I couldn't get out of my head. I wanted to talk to you, to get to know you, but I had no idea how. I tried to think of something to say other than, hey, man, and my brain would just short-circuit. He took a step closer to me, his eyes earnest and intense. I'd see you carrying your books, or just the way you'd look down when you walked, and I wanted to know what you were thinking, but I was so scared. Scared you were straight. Scared you'd think I was some kind of creep for staring at you in the hallway. Scared of getting rejected. So I came up with this ridiculous, stupid plan. He gestured around my apartment. I thought if I could just get in here, if I could just talk to you for 5 minutes, I'd be able to figure it out. See if there was any chance you might feel the same way. His voice cracked on the last few words. And then last night happened. When you touched my back. Lucas, it wasn't just you. I felt it too. It was everything I could do not to turn around and kiss you right there. But I panicked. I felt like I had tricked you into being kind to me, and it felt wrong. I've been going out of my mind all day, thinking I completely ruined the one chance I had. I stood there, stunned into silence, as his confession washed over me. Every doubt, every fear, every anxious spiral from the last 2 days evaporated, replaced by a feeling of such profound, soaring relief that it almost brought me to my knees. He felt it. He felt it all. He had been just as scared, just as uncertain as I was. You didn't ruin anything, I said, and my own voice was thick with emotion. Caleb, I've been watching you in the hallway too. I thought you were the straightest man on the entire planet. I thought I was completely invisible. A look of pure astonishment crossed his face. Invisible? Lucas, you're the only person I've seen. And with that, the last remaining wall between us crumbled into dust. He closed the small distance that separated us, his hands coming up to gently cup my face. His touch was hesitant at first, questioning, as if he still couldn't believe this was real. I leaned into his touch, my eyes fluttering shut. Can I? He whispered, his breath warm against my lips. I didn't answer with words. I leaned in and closed the final inch, pressing my lips against his. The first touch was soft, tentative, a question. But then he responded, a soft sound of relief escaping his throat, and the kiss deepened. It wasn't like anything I had ever imagined. It was better. It was real. It was filled with all the unspoken words, all the nervous glances, all the pent-up hope and fear of the last few days, of the last few months. It was the end of the silence and the beginning of everything else. In the weeks that followed our confession, my life transformed. The quiet, monochrome routine I had known for so long was suddenly flooded with vibrant color. My apartment, once a solitary fortress, became a shared space. Caleb's presence filled the rooms in a way that felt not like an intrusion, but like a completion. His scent mingled with the smell of my books and coffee. His ridiculously oversized hoodie was permanently draped over my armchair. His laughter became the new soundtrack to my evenings. We fell into a rhythm that felt both exhilaratingly new and deeply comfortable. We went on actual dates, to dimly lit restaurants, to independent movie theaters, to a woodworking fair where I watched, fascinated, as he talked about joinery and wood grain with a passion that made his entire face light up. But my favorite moments were the quiet ones. The nights we spent curled up on my sofa, his arms securely around me, reading our own books in a comfortable silence that was the polar opposite of the tense quiet we had once endured. We learned each other's histories, our fears, our dreams. I learned about the pressure he felt from his family to follow a more traditional path and the courage it took for him to start his own business. He learned about the past heartbreaks that had led me to build my walls so high, listening with a gentle patience that made me feel safe enough to let them down, brick by brick. He saw the anxious, overthinking parts of me and wasn't scared away. Instead, he met them with a steady, reassuring calm that made them quiet down. His apartment across the hall, with its newly repaired plumbing, became almost obsolete. He spent most nights at my place, and his toothbrush soon took up permanent residence next to mine in the bathroom, a small, domestic detail that filled me with a quiet, profound joy every time I saw it. The hallway that was once a space of longing and missed opportunities became a non-existent boundary, the few steps between our doors a journey we no longer had to make alone. One rainy Saturday afternoon, about 2 months in, we were cooking dinner together in my small kitchen. I was chopping vegetables while he stirred a sauce on the stove. The room was warm and filled with the delicious smell of garlic and tomatoes. He turned away from the stove for a moment, wiping his hands on a towel. He leaned against the counter, watching me with a soft, affectionate look in his eyes that still made my heart skip a beat. He was quiet for a moment. Then a playful, mischievous grin spread across his face. "Hey, Lucas," he said, his voice dropping into a low, conspiratorial tone. "My shower is making a weird noise again." I paused, my knife hovering over the cutting board, and looked up at him. I saw the laughter in his eyes, the shared memory of that ridiculous, fateful night. All the anxiety and tension that had once defined that memory was gone, replaced by a deep, enduring fondness. It was our story. I played along, putting a hand on my hip and raising an eyebrow. "Is that so? Is it a catastrophic, apartment flooding kind of noise?" "It could be," he said, his grin widening as he stepped closer. "I might need to borrow yours. You know, just in case." He wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, pulling me back against his chest and resting his chin on my shoulder. "What do you think? Can you help a neighbor out?" I leaned back into his embrace, a genuine, happy laugh bubbling up from my chest. "I think," I said, turning my head to kiss him, "that I can probably make an exception for you." It's strange to think how close I came to missing all of this. My life could have continued on its quiet, solitary track, with Caleb remaining just a handsome stranger across the hall. All it took was one moment of manufactured crisis, one act of foolish, desperate courage on his part, to knock a hole in the wall between our worlds. It taught me that sometimes, the greatest risks aren't the ones that lead to rejection, but the ones you never take at all. Love doesn't always announce itself politely. Sometimes it shows up at your door after midnight, dripping wet and pretending to have a plumbing emergency, and all you have to do is be brave enough to let it in.